Tonight's discussion, how people insult themselves and how we can rebalance ourselves from everyday insults of many. So let's get started with, and I may have to hook up my battery. I thought I was actually much higher. So excuse me while I do some maintenance here. This is, as we always say, managing change, okay? This is really the deal. Sometimes you find that you don't have everything just perfect. And that kind of brings me to part of my discussion tonight, and that is how people try to insult us. And I know I'm not supposed to be doing all this stuff while I'm preparing and speaking directly into the camera. But you know what? This is all about managing change. And life, as we know, does not wait for us to have everything perfect. What we've also learned, which is also part of today's discussion, how people insult themselves, is how we respond or react. And you can create any phrase that you feel is appropriate to address those situations, just as I had. Where I just realized, and I thought I looked at my battery strength, and all of a sudden it just dripped. It just dropped to almost nothing, and the little yellow bar showed up on the top, and that quickly went to red. It's how we address these situations that really dictate what we think of ourselves. You know, you've heard me say this before. Rich, good evening, thanks for checking in. You've heard me say we have self-efficacy or a lack of self-efficacy. It's not purely an attitude. It's an attitude driven in the right direction. So a classic was, I'm just about to start the live chat. It's not a big monumental feat. At the same time, the battery gives up. Now I could try to turn it off and start again. I just decided, let's keep going. So here's an actual example that you may have seen in the marketplace. How many times have you been to a conference, a seminar, a workshop, a webinar, an online program, and the technology is not working, even though the people behind the scenes may have done an incredible job to ensure that everything was working the night before, the morning, just before the program started. It is how you, the individual who is in the face of that program, respond to the situation. So we're going to kick that off as our initial story, and then we're going to jump right into, as we say, the stake of the matter, how people insult themselves. This came about from working across a number of different businesses and looking at how supervisors, managers, even instructors, and in some cases teachers, would berate the student, the employee, the associate. And of course, we see this all the way up through corporate, the corporate echelon and the structure. So how do you protect yourself? How do you realistically protect yourself without losing the job? Because really, if you take the Wells Fargo situation, for example, and I do use that example. One, we still have a bank account with them, and one of the senior executives decided to create false accounts, push the responsibility and the tactical execution of that to lower level client-facing employees. And what occurred, the real insult to civics, to the ethics of the matter, is that they walked away with a parachute of some literally millions of dollars, while the rank and file, the client-facing employee, has to scramble to make $300, $400, $500 a week, and certainly cannot get a reference, couldn't use that position because the marketplace knew where they were coming from, and therefore it also spoke to their ethics. So let's see what we can do with this and see how it can make sense for you tonight, tomorrow, if you're going into work and you're faced with hostile people. And I will give you some real examples of situations that I've been in, not just found myself. That's almost crass to say that. Well, I found myself in the thick of the woods, although I'd been walking there for 4 or 5 years, walking, notice, not working, and all of a sudden, this environment faced off at me. You know that I talk about the victim is the person that is not aware, chooses not to be aware of their environment. Other than someone literally coming up and shooting you in the head or doing what they call a sucker punch. And of course, as I did a lot of traveling in the past, the Mack truck, which was in many cases my best friend. And unfortunately in others, I've seen major accidents where it just wiped out smaller cars and even smaller trucks than themselves. So my point there is you still need to be aware of the environment you work in and pay attention to the relationships and the dynamics of the different personality types. Not just the person, the personality types, because that's what you're really addressing. Okay? So let's take a look at this. So here you are, you're looking to begin a new behavior, learn a new behavior, instill a benefit of what you believe will help you. It could be learning an actual subject. It could be learning a language, which is certainly crucial today. I know we came up learning Latin. People say it's a dead language, yet the fundamentals can serve you certainly today as we do all this texting and messaging and abbreviations. People today are certainly learning French, Cantonese for the Chinese, although there are other dialects. Spanish. Spanish has its nuances. So if you were to learn 2 or 3 languages, and let's say your community, the circle that you move in, pushes back, how could you address that? Well, right off the cuff, I wouldn't say, and because they know you, I wouldn't say because it's socially polite, I wouldn't say it's going to help me in my career, because the immediate pushback is laughter, belittling, and antagonizing you, right? And even though they'll say it's in good faith, they're actually saying, please don't do that because you're making us look bad. Please don't do that because now we have to work a little harder, a little smarter. I would simply say, oh, it's just an interest of mine. Now, you may find that people will continue, certainly close friends, maybe even family, will continue to berate or try to persuade you that it's not that significant. You've lived this long already. Why do you need it? Well, it could simply be, as many of us have, hobbies. It's an interest. It tweaks your inner sense of accomplishment. Sometimes we don't have to respond. You know, we do this when we're out in public, and if someone is starting to be hostile and we are not in a position to arrest that behavior, we pull away. Well, so too we can do that with words, with vocabulary, with conversation, especially with people that we have to see each and every day. And they initially want to throw you off, right? They want to take you off center. So right off the bat, the need to respond is not necessarily the best approach. Secondly, we can then ask them, well, what interests do you have? What I just did is literally turn the conversation on its heel. In Toastmasters, we do that with table topics. The whole idea behind table topics, of course, is to be spontaneous, right? In the moment. And if you can't, then you change the moment, right? You bring a different conversation to the table. So in this case, you spin it back on them, like a good spin in table tennis, right? You know, ping pong. You spin it back on the person. Well, what's your interest? What type of things do you do when you're not here? Well, I get drunk and, you know, the other two. Great. What do you drink? You know, you just gotta segue into that and let them talk and show their lack of interest in themselves of the world we all live in. Okay? My perspective, why I think like this, is because the schools I went to, people came from all over the world. And I was one of the so-called financially less fortunate. Yet, I say this emphatically, It is your passion for the interest in things. To, again, I love to use the kindergarten example. Kids in a kindergarten, they're discovering, they're navigating, they're touching, they're feeling, they're licking things, they're sharing things, they're giving and taking, they're pulling, they're trying to find limitations. And unfortunately, we get to a certain stage. All of us have different stages. I haven't met mine yet, apparently, where we begin to dumb ourselves down. We extract ourselves from society. So the abuser in our cultures, in our communities, in our business, the supervisor, manager, division, what have you, executives, who identify that as a weakness, they prey on it. And all you have to do is go into any company around the world, quite frankly, and you'll see the same behavior being shown to the employees, who are basically the bread and butter of the business. So there is an opposite emotional attachment. We need these people, and yet certain members of staff feel they can berate them. So we can immediately, number one, ignore the conversation. Just ignore it. You know, and here's an example. What's the opposite of love? 10 seconds, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. No, it's not hate. It's indifference. Because hate and love are an emotional attachment. Whereas indifference, whatever. Right? So we can play that. We then can say, well, what's your interest? We throw the conversation back on the person. And we know 9 out of 10 people love to talk about themselves. The third one, this is where you get creative. The third one is to have a conversation in ourselves already implanted. You know, there are some plants out here that are incredibly dexterous. They're incredibly creative. They're incredibly inventive. They will mimic other plants so you won't cut them down. They will attach themselves to other plants so you cannot cut them down. They will give off floral, design, shape, and even the fruit, so other life forms, bees, flies, etc., can pollinate them so that they will survive. So how do we do that for ourselves, right? This is the cool part. How do we do that for ourselves? We create the scripts, just as if you've ever done call center operations, any aspect. There is a script. That script is practiced. So then it becomes part of your DNA. So when you're speaking, you can ad lib, staying on track. You can adjust, staying on track. So why don't we do that for ourselves so that when we do encounter these monstrosities, we can address them accordingly in our minds. So for an example is you reinforce the conversation you're going to have in anticipation of a reoccurrence of past experience with these particular individuals. And you then use words, you would use actions that you take. For example, you might fold your hands, you might open your hands. You might roll your fingers, right, like this. You might do something in a physical matter, because we know motion creates emotion, and a lack creates heart attack. Right? That's holding it in, right? When you hold it in and you think that I can deal with this, and it's 3, 4, 5, 10 years later, your mind has become like the muscles in your body. They have become accustomed to not responding, and that tension and the chemical imbalance begins to show. You can then practice this exercise given the past experience. And you're going to keep using that, because the outcome, the outcome is when the person approaches you in that fashion and you do not respond the way they expect you to, the way that you have in the past, then they can't get at you. In parts of psychology and disclosure of people's weaknesses, one of the strategies is to acknowledge that you're not good in an environment. and you acknowledge it in public. That in and of itself is a strength, because now that it's public, that community can't use it against you. It's actually an insult that they would, knowing what you have. And other people actually reprimand them. That's how dynamic our cultures are, our social inclinations. Yes, we might tease somebody at the same time. And we had this in school. A young student in our school, Philip Moore. He had calipers, the old kind, which were not flexible and certainly not the styles that they have today. But he was incredible in swimming. And our housemaster, that's how we called him, Brother Early at the time. They're no longer brothers at Pryor Park College, which I speak about fairly often on my live chats because I think it was a great experience. The institution is now 200 years old, the educational. They brought girls. Can I go back? And he would tell us, don't handicap the handicap, because they have strengths in areas that you are weak. And he could blow most of us away in swimming. Okay, and he's also his fortitude. So once again, when we talk about how people insult themselves, it's their insecurity with what they already have, right? What they already have, they don't respect it. They feel, hey, Malcolm, good evening. Very good to see you. They don't respect it. They don't appreciate it. And then something in their life, a message, a socialization, a behavioral trait, a need, some need in them, both positive and negative, has told them that they need to lash out at life, and you happen to be that life form at that moment that they need to lash out to. So just to kind of summarize here, because this is some interesting stuff that you don't have to talk about indefinitely, and I really don't believe in that anymore. Because we're not trying to stay in the past. We're trying to move forward. Again, we don't use the word try, right? We are moving forward. Because once you think of something, you begin to look at the solutions. Then you look at methods to execute those potentials, to achieve those solutions. And then you're on that journey, okay? So one, when we talk about how people insult themselves, we can simply ignore the comment, the question. If the person continues, we can turn the question back on them and say, what kind of interest do you have? What kind of hobby? What is it that they're picking on you that you can reverse and have them identify that they have an interest? Now the conversation is nothing about you or their need to attack. Okay. Thirdly, you have a conversation with yourself because these occurrences have already happened, right? You've already experienced it. So now you're going to say to yourself, okay, when the individual uses a certain word, and as a coach, I do not use the word because now it's anchored on me, right? It's association with me. So I have them write it out. I don't even write out the words. And my reasoning is this. They're getting the insults, right? They're getting the insults. Good evening, Craig. How are you, sir? Great to see you. And there's another gentleman. I have to apologize. I do not know how to pronounce your name, but welcome. Pradiyam, I believe. They don't have, they have been saying these words to you. You've felt them, you've received them. So now you go away privately and you write out the words, you write out the phrase, you write out the situation that it occurred. Then you say to yourself, what would I say back? Right? What would I say back? Now, if you antagonize them by trying to escalate the insults, you know where that's going to end up. On the other hand, if you say something like, and again from an experience I had in school, which stays with me today, and I don't have a problem with it because I can use it as an example. Some students had learned in an English class the word niggardly, which is also interesting because, again, fast forward about 30, 40 years, maybe 30 years, the word was used in a city hall meeting. I won't mention the city because one doesn't need to start that kind of nonsense. And that sensitivity to addressing the issue and not anchor to people or a city is important. So in the English class, let's get back to the original, in the English class, these students who we went to school together had learnt the word niggardly. And one of them, who happened to be, as always, a so-called close friend, approached me with the word and simply said, "Ron, why are you acting so niggardly?" Well, fortunately, since I went to the same school, I also learned the art of parry and moving back and forth in conversation, right? You use that as strategy. I said, well, I was going to use his name. I won't. I was going to say Humpty Dumpty. I don't know what the word is. I haven't never heard that word before. And his response was very interesting. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Why are you acting this way? So instead of saying to myself, instead of saying, this guy's trying to trip me up, he's being rude, I said, why would he come out of an English class and feel he can use the word in my presence? Interesting. You see, you have to go beyond what the moment presents to you. You have to realize that society has multiple layers of injustice, inequities, prejudices, ugliness. And it's up to you and your intelligence, if you think you're intelligent, this is the challenge, to begin to strip away those layers. The end of that conversation, by the way, with the word niggardly was, I don't know the word. I'll look it up in the dictionary. I'll get back to you. You see? So ironic, 30 plus years ago, a word that many people get upset with and did more recently, to me, was the shallowness of the person using it. The association, niggardly, is with N-I-G-G-E-R, absolutely. And many people associate that with a time and place, even today, that is hostile to them. Take any nationality, go speak with them, and they'll tell you. I have friends who are Kyrgyzstan, and they'll tell you certain behaviors of people, certain words they're sensitive to. And unfortunately, we think you have to be brash, you have to be aggressive, you have to suck it up. Instead of saying, let's find out where that comes from and begin to squash it. And I do mean squash it. And you squash it by showing the ignorance. You squash it by simply saying, and I did say this later on, a couple of weeks later, I said, well, I called the young boy his name, and I said, you know, your ancestors, didn't they go through prima nocte? Totally threw him off. He didn't know I knew that. He didn't know the relevance of it. And when he did check it out, he came and apologized. I said, that's okay. I understand that you have been conditioned. And this is the way we spoke. This is at 9, 10, 11 years old. So you can't say that it's age. You can't say that it's social. You can't say that it's nationality. It's awareness. It's awareness. And communication is the last and only frontier because it's in our mind. Those meanings, those definitions, those hurts, the pain, it's in your head. And unless you attack it in a very aggressive manner for yourself and develop modalities, develop behaviors, develop responses, not reactions, you're going to be susceptible to them down the road. So, let's wrap up. You succeed by demonstrating that your newly identified thoughts, which are reinforced via your personal private actions, will create future improved, desirable, managed states of behavior. Okay? So these are I believe in tactical. I don't believe or think, you should just say, well, think positively. Things will work out. No, they don't. Because even at my age, I still see people much younger behaving in a very insecure manner, a Neanderthal type mentality manner, because they have been socially programmed to believe they can. By the way, the Montessori school system, which an Italian lady started in America in about, I believe, 40s, had Donna, good evening, how are you? Thanks for checking in. Malcolm, once again, thanks. She created this educational system because she believed that the mind, when it's very young, is most susceptible and adaptable to learning many things. So when you think of the adult behaving in a way at work, at recreational environments, and certainly the dynamics in family, that all comes from that socialization at an early age. So the concept of how people insult themselves is very much fixed in how they've been introduced to life. And what's so beautiful about the Montessori school system and the children that go through it, they're exposed to all these cultures, as fortunately I was. I didn't go through the Montessori school system. I was exposed to multiple cultures at a very young age, so I have an appreciation for that. So when I come to you with strategic interventions and coaching, it's not, this is the model, this is the template. It's, how have you been programmed? And I've found that when I speak to, I have a very good friend who's from China, and we had great conversations when I did a project in Brooklyn. He was studying at one of the colleges there. He's since gone on to up in Connecticut, and he studies mathematical equations and calculations on the behavior of people. So given a particular situation, they can create algorithms, which is nothing more, by the way, than social media. You do know that, right? And he then can extrapolate how we're going to behave. Well, it's the same thing here. Now you know what's going on. Now you can begin to arrest your own response reaction to situations that you have seen multiple times. Unfortunately, many of us don't have the support or don't find the resource to begin to arrest it and adjust and literally change our behavior to those types of negative situations. So I've given you 3 examples tonight. I'm not going to continue. I want to let those ferment. The stories are real that I've shared with you because I think we can give, this phrase, be empathetic, be sympathetic. Nice, warm, socially fuzzy. The reality is we still go away, and I talk about the 2 o'clock in the morning panic attack. We still have those because there isn't a process in place that we can adapt and begin to arrest these communication challenges. And especially when someone is a supervisor and they berate you. So I'll finish up with this one last story. Working at a telemarketing company, I was in charge of a number of accounts, and I also had to do training with the different licensed and unlicensed representatives who sold at the time. It was Superman's Strawberry Health and Life and a whole bunch of health-related products and services. And the young lady, who was a little younger than myself, would always come in and charge, I call it, charging at me with all these questions and what was going on last night and what were the numbers and what were the categories. So I went back home and I said, "Ooh, wow, we got a challenge." I have multiple personalities. I'm okay with that. So I went into my library, pulled out a book, and I read for the first time Managing Your Manager. This is some time ago. I went back into the work environment, and before she opened her mouth, I said, "By the way, these are the numbers. By the way, what's the campaigns we're running tonight? By the way, I understand so-and-so is not going to be in. We're going to have to change our protocol. I understand we're having 3 clients listening in tonight." Within a week, that negative behavior, that insecurity that she exhibited was neutralized. We became the best professional friends. As we say in England, we never went out for tea. So, Andy, thanks for checking in. So I'm going to leave you with that tonight. The whole point is how people insult themselves, and we do a kind of paradigm shift, right? They're not insulting us unless we accept it. I'll give you a quick summary there. When is a gift a gift? I'll count down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A gift is only a gift once you receive it, once you accept it. So don't accept the insults. Learn to ignore. 2, ask back a question that puts the conversation on that person, even if it is your boss. They know what they're doing. Trust me, they know what they're doing. And thirdly, practice your own mantra so that when you do find yourself in those situations, you have a response mechanism in place. Very much like you have at work if there's a fire drill. Let's learn the corporate nuances, the corporate behaviors that we are expected to adapt and learn and execute, and adapt them to ourselves. And stop looking at things as totally separate. They are all one. You do not change in your body just because you go to work. If anything, you become even more clustered, as in cloister, and you kind of shut down instead of opening up. So tell me how you do over the next couple of weeks. That's wonderful with some feedback. As always, this is Ronald Allen, Managing Change Through Effective Communications. You know where to find me.